Don't you worry, I got it right this time. I'm all set up. I've been doing other things while I've been waiting for this stream, so pretty organised today, surprisingly. Normally it takes me to, I'm putting things together at the very last minute, but today, not the case. Just waiting for the live stream to catch up and hopefully be, of course, picking up on the right end. It doesn't seem to be coming through on YouTube yet, but here we go. Recover your contact. Your audience will see it in a moment. There we go. It's finally starting to stream through. Just taking a little bit of time. Just make sure it's all catching up. If it's catching up, then I know I'm doing all right. Okay, all right. So sound is coming through. Okay, so you will find the start time for this video down in the description, but it's going to be going unlisted, so you won't be able to watch the live stream later unless you're a patron. It only becomes available to patrons. But I will release this video as an edited version later on, sometime, I don't know when. I've been doing pretty well with that most of the time. Now, if you haven't been part of my live streams, normally what I do is I present everything first, and then I open it up for questions and answers, which is exactly what I plan to do this time around. Same process. Okay, all right. I'm going to pop out my earplugs. Sound is coming through nice. Video seems to be working fine. YouTube seems to be happy. And as a general rule, it looks like we're ready to go. So sit back, grab yourself a drink, grab yourself some food, get comfortable, and I will cover this as best I can. And like I said, hang around near the end because I will do some quick Q&A for those of you who are interested. Certainly, I understand that Q&A is always good near the end of a live stream. All right, I'm ready now. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. And we're going to talk about knowledge checks for Dungeons and Dragons 5e. We're going to look at the problems with Dungeons and Dragons skill checks, particularly the knowledge check. And also, I'm going to give you some solutions. I don't really care how people run their knowledge checks in their games. So if you think that I've got sort of some bias to it, I really couldn't give a toss. What I will do is I will present all of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the process of the knowledge check. I'm going to then demonstrate with miniatures, dice, and a map. And I'm going to go through the different problems you will face when you do a knowledge check in the game of Dungeons and Dragons with regard to players and yourself. And then I will provide you with some solutions. So make sure to stick around for as much of that as you possibly can. Okay, here we go. Starting off. Dungeons & Dragons 5e suffers from the same problems older versions of the game have had to deal with. Essentially, the key thing is that players will metagame. That is just part and parcel. Now, if you get players and have players who do not metagame and they're always just playing in character and they don't use player knowledge rather than and impart that into their character and they're just using character knowledge when they're playing the game, great, then you won't need to worry about watching this video and you can go and watch something else. Then there's the other factor, and that is that dungeon masters are unsure what to do, or they fall into a trap. There's usually a trap, and these traps are laid by players with regard to the questions they ask and what they think they can get away with. Because remember, when you say that Dungeons and Dragons is a game, people tend to think that it's a game where you need to win or be successful. The concept of failure in Dungeons and Dragons is actually very hard for people to understand. A knowledge check can be of a range of different difficulties. So it goes from 5 through to 30, and in some cases you would not roll at all because it's too easy and you just give them the information, or it's too hard and you don't have them make a roll because they can't possibly know that information. So 5 would be very easy, 10 would be easy, 15 would be medium, then 20 is hard, 25 is very hard, 30 is near impossible, and therefore that's your range in terms of how you lay it out. Okay, there are a number of different skills that are sort of used in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but knowledge checks fall into the intelligence ability check basket. It's like a big basket with a range of possible skills that have been detailed by the Dungeons & Dragons 5e game. That is Arcana, which is basically magic, information, and lore, and it can cover not exclusively that. It can cover other things as well. Something like history covers historical events and lore as well. Investigation is where you're making deductions based on clues that you come across, and it can fall into other brackets dependent on what you need as a dungeon master. Nature is lore and information on terrain, plants, animals, and the nature of the world. And then religion is basically lore and information regarding deities or gods, rites, prayer, and some sort of symbolism around something that's religious or of a church-like or temple-like nature. So a whole lot of information. All of that is really easy to find. You just turn to page 177 through to about 178, and it details all of that in the player's handbook. Now, normally you set your DC or difficulty class in advance before the players have to make the roll. But in some situations, players will ask questions that you may not have prepared, and therefore you might have to make some stuff up on the fly. Now, when that happens, don't feel afraid that that's a problem. Just write down what you think would be sensible, and you can go number it 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 if you really want, and then just make some bullet points along that. But if you're going to do something like that, make sure you have given them something else to do while you're writing up your stuff on the fly. But usually most of this is done ahead of time. Okay, so there are 3 major problems that tend to crop up with regard to making knowledge checks. And I'm going to use a sphinx and an old temple as a good example of how it sort of plays out. So here's my example. There's the sphinx, there's the party, and they're exploring this jungle temple, or whatever you want to call it, and there's a whole lot of different things they might want to make knowledge checks on. They might want to make a knowledge check on what this, where the statue was made, how long it was, who made it. They want to make a knowledge check to try and figure out the riddle that the Sphinx has given them. Maybe that's what they're trying to use it for, or get themselves a clue. Maybe they need to make a knowledge check about the actual temple area so that they don't wind up in the wrong place. What was this altar used for? So we'll move this dice out of the way. What was the altar used for that's over here where all the blood is? What sort of blood is this? Is this humanoid blood? And there's a lot of different things. The forest area, what do I know about that forest area? So lots of different knowledge checks you can make. The very first problem that tends to happen when a knowledge check starts to get rolled and somebody suggests it is that everybody picks up their dice. And they all roll the dice, all wanting to make a knowledge check. Because if Bob can make a check and Sally can make a check, why can't I? And unfortunately, Dungeons & Dragons tends to embrace that concept. And so forth, that's actually made it more difficult for a lot of Dungeon Masters to get their head around. So how can I deal with that? Given that if I have something between 4 to 6 players at my table, the chances are that no matter what their modifier is, they're going to roll pretty good. They're not going to roll very low. They're going to get a pretty good score, and therefore somebody's going to be successful. So if I take 6 dice here and I roll them, I've got a 19. So somebody's got a 19. It won't matter what their modifier is. If they've got a 0, that's fine. If they've got a 1, they've now got themselves a 20 on their knowledge check, which means that the group is usually always going to be successful, or get not just successful, but they're going to get a really good score because everybody rolls the dice. So there is your problem. There's your first problem. So what a lot of players don't like, but Dungeon Masters do, and that is they will ask, only one person can make the knowledge check. That's it. One person rolls the dice and they make the knowledge check, nobody else. So that sort of reduces the number of dice rolls. That can be helpful. That's one way of doing it. Or another way of dealing with it is, well, okay, I'm not going to be that restrictive. What I'm going to say is that all the players that are proficient in that particular knowledge and who would have some sort of training and information that they have studied in that field, they get to make a dice roll. So maybe you wind up with 2 people making a religion check or a nature check. And so therefore the chance of success increases in terms of getting good information rather than just useless information or very basic information, but you haven't made it completely open season. Okay, so that's another way of dealing with it. Or one person rolls and other people can help. Now that's one person that makes the roll and somebody else helping is you add advantage. And so basically it's the same thing essentially as if you have proficiency, I guess, amongst the group, amongst maybe 2 or 3 individuals. So one person makes the roll, but somebody else is allowed to help. That might be because they are trained in that area, or they might not be trained in that area. That's up to you, and they get advantage on their dice roll. So they improve their chances, but it's not a free-for-all. So there's another way of dealing with it. Okay? Or you can set a difficulty class, or DC, for the characters that are proficient, and for those who aren't proficient, you set a different difficulty class. So, for example, this allows everybody to roll, but those who are proficient are working with a different set of numbers and values that they have to hit. So, for example, a person who is proficient only needs to roll a 5 to get basic information, whereas somebody who is not proficient in that particular knowledge would have to get double that, so you double it. So they have to get a 10 to get basic information. Whereas somebody who is proficient in, say, religion and knowledge and nature and sphinxes and so forth, if you're making a knowledge check on the sphinx, then somebody who's proficient only really needs a 10 to get some reasonable information out of the dungeon master. But if you are not trained or not proficient, you have to get double that. That means you have to get a 20, which means it eliminates those people who are not proficient getting any information that would normally be like a 15, which is usually the sorts of numbers we're dealing with, and something like a 20 for somebody who's proficient, because somebody who is not proficient is having to roll double the value compared to somebody who is proficient. So there's another way of dealing with that particular problem, and so everybody gets to roll, but everybody's roll is read differently by the dungeon master. So a tactic or strategy that you can use. Okay, so you've rolled your dice, you've got a score, and the player sees their dice roll, and this is where things become problematic. They want to roll again because they saw their dice roll, they know their modifier added to that's not very high, and they ask the dungeon master, look, can I roll the dice again? Because they want a better result. They know the dice score is going to be low, which means they're not likely to get any they're going to get poor information, or they will fail the check and not get the information that they want or need. Okay, so how do you deal with that? Well, your answer can be no rolling again ever. So no, you cannot roll the dice. You rolled an 8, you add your modifier, that is it, we're done. Or you can say you can only roll the dice again when your proficiency or your skill value increases at some point when you level up. So maybe you increase your intelligence modifier, and that increases your check modifier, therefore makes sense that you would be able to make another check on that. But that's really going to require a bit of time to pass from the time of taking the first roll. So the first roll stands, and the second roll can be made at a later date if they really want to, provided that their proficiency bonus has gone up, which means that their modifier for intelligence or their knowledge skill will increase, or they have actually increased their intelligence modifier and become, smarter. They've learnt more stuff. So another way of dealing with, I want to roll again. Okay, so the last one is failures and low rolls are boring. Why are they boring? So when you roll a really low number and your response as the dungeon master is something like this: you know nothing. Okay, so now the player knows they have just hit a brick wall, and they go back to what they were trying to do before was, can I roll again? Or can other people roll the dice? So you wind up having to deal with problem 1 and 2 now that problem 3 has risen its head. So what you need to do with your failures or low rolls is you still need to give them information. If you say something like, you don't know anything, and I have done this myself. So if you feel like I haven't done this before, trust me, I've done this. I've made that mistake more than a few times, and I have dealt with it. It also slows down the adventure. They don't know what to do next. They now have to speculate. They were hoping that knowledge check will give them a bit of a clue to move them forward. So even if we can't give them exactly what they want, we have to give them something. So your first option is to do the following. that the Dungeon Master gives them information even with a low roll, but it's false information. Here's the problem. Given that a Dungeon Master is given false information, the player won't know it's false information, but they rolled low and their modifier is not very good, so the chances are they probably know that either the information they're getting is incorrect, misleading, or not completely accurate, or there's bits of it missing. So they're not going to be very trustful of any information the Dungeon Master presents if you start giving false information. But you can do it. I'm not saying this video is not about you can't do something. It's just how you do it and how often you do it. Okay. Or the Dungeon Master provides some limited information but not enough to be useful. So this is one of the problems, is you provide some information, but it's not useful enough for the players to actually use it. They may not know this, and the Dungeon Master might be the only person who knows that. But that's one way of sort of playing it out. So you give them a little bit of information, but it's not enough, and they know they've still got this roadblock, and you haven't given them false information. So two ways of dealing with that problem of failure being boring or low rolls coming up. If the player can't see the dice roll, they won't know what information was wrong or right, or if there is missing information. So let's take the dice roll away. How do you do that? Okay, you hide the dice roll. If the only reason the issue comes up is the player knows what the numerical value is in the metagaming. That's what's going on, right? So you take the dice roll away. So now the dice roll is made behind the Dungeon Master screen or behind the Dungeon Master's hand, and the players can't see what that dice roll is anymore. Only the Dungeon Master knows what that dice roll is, and then they give them the information. So you're only asking the player for their knowledge modifier or their intelligence modifier, and you see them in numerical value and you tell them, and you eliminate the issue of metagaming. Here's the problem. The players are still metagaming because now they know they can't see the roll. Now they're trying to guess what the roll is by the body language and the way you're talking as a Dungeon Master, which now means you have to try and keep away from your tells. All Dungeon Masters have a tell, something that gives away their motives and how they're operating in the game. So the players are actually using a tactic used by poker players and gamblers, which is they're looking for the Dungeon Master tells. Okay, so we still haven't solved the problem, and yet the problem is there. Still a way you can do it. A lot of Dungeon Masters do it. Okay, and players don't like the idea of making a knowledge check, but they don't get to roll a dice. They like to roll dice. So we still haven't solved all of our problems. You could try and hide the DC or difficulty class. That doesn't really work because players will figure out what is considered roughly a 5, 10, 15, 20 based off just the nature of the information they're asking. So yet again, more metagaming taking place by the player to try and figure these things out. And we're not actually playing in character, and we're still not getting past the problem we had. Now, somebody had mentioned apparently that you could do this following technique, which is when they roll their knowledge check, they pick up 3 dice. And they're going to roll all 3 dice. And the Dungeon Master ahead of time is going to pick one of those dice to be the actual dice they use for the knowledge check. And they will know what the modifier is. And the players know that this is taking place. And so they are still doing a bit of guesswork and gambling in the process, trying to figure out the probabilities. So you roll your dice. And so I've picked the wooden dice. Okay, I've picked the wooden dice. I haven't told the players I'm picking the wooden dice. And then I add their modifier to that, and that is the value they get, and then I give them the information on the knowledge check they want. And they have a choice. Like I rolled 2 low numbers, and I rolled a 20. So now I am using my brain, my metagaming brain as a player to try and figure out what is the likelihood that I get a really good piece of information, and what's the likelihood that I don't get a particularly good piece of information. Well, the chances are I rolled 2 sort of average-ish numbers with my modifier, so it's going to be in around the 10 range probably. I might have been really lucky and rolled a 20, and then I listen to what the Dungeon Master says, and then I again start guessing whether I have been successful. Now, this technique can work, but it's not something that you can rely on indefinitely. I feel like at some point there's going to be a problem. Okay, all right, so we've done that. What about if we get really funky? Let's get really, really, really sneaky, because we're still dealing with the metagaming by the player and trying to get that knowledge check out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my player roll their 20-sided dice, and as the Dungeon Master behind my Dungeon Master screen, I'm also going to roll a dice that they can't see. So the player rolls their dice, they add their modifier, I can see their number, I know what their modifier is because they told me what the number is, their score, and I roll my dice behind the screen at about the same time, pretty much exactly the same time, or if not possible, just beforehand. And I'm not actually using the value that the player got on the dice. I'm using the value that the Dungeon Master got on their dice. And really what I'm doing is I'm being quite sneaky. I am pretending that the player has control over the dice roll when in fact I am rolling the dice. You are essentially hiding the dice roll in a way that looks like you're not hiding the dice roll. Now, whether you like that technique or method is really up to you. My suggestion to you is try all of these techniques and keep changing them constantly so that your players can't readapt to your techniques and methods of dealing with the metagaming of the knowledge check. You will never find a perfect method because people will always metagame, even those who think they are incapable of metagaming because they are such good role players at the table. Okay, so I have many videos for players and Dungeon Masters which you are welcome to go and check out. Feel free to go and watch those. I have a Patreon page where you can go and buy, basically support my channel. And I give you access to all of the live streams unlisted and a whole bunch of other things, and you get priority on the things that I will make on my channel in terms of the content. I have affiliate links to the book depository and Amazon down in the description. I have a merch shelf now down on underneath my videos, and make sure to share, like and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I am live and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. I'm not gone. I am going to come back to the screen and I'm going to have a discussion with you about the whole process. Now look, just because my video topic is a particular topic does not mean that I will not talk about other things related to Dungeons and Dragons. I don't care whether you are a player or a Dungeon Master, I will talk about whatever you want to talk about for the next maximum of 40 minutes. You've got 40 minutes of my time before I disappear and before this video becomes unlisted. And then of course I've got to go and do my editing and a bit of work, a lot of homework you might say. All right, so questions, start throwing them out there about knowledge checks. Now I do understand that people want a video on other aspects of knowledge checks. There are hardly any videos. I will do more videos on the topic. It's really just about what are the things that stand out for me. And I couldn't find very much. Honestly, it was very difficult to find anything on YouTube regarding the topic. So I thought this is a topic to talk about. Now, F. Hubber has made a good point that making a knowledge check really needs to be determined ahead of time, which we've already talked about. You need to do a bit of prep. You can do it on the fly. It's not impossible. I know it sounds like it might be difficult. And if you are going to set a DC that's like 100 or 30 and they can't hit that number, or you tried to make a number that they can't hit, then don't bother having them roll a dice. Just let them know that they just don't know that information and that it has been lost. Information lost to the millennia. Good point, F. Hubber. Tyler, hello, how's it going? Throw out those questions if you have them. Anything will do. I am happy to do them now. It's better for me to answer questions in the live chat now rather than down in the comments section later on. John, hello again from the USA. Hello, John. How's it going, mate? Hi, Matt. Nice to see you. Not surprised. I know Matt follows me a lot, and so does F Hubber. As soon as they get notifications, they're over there, which is great. I love it. It's good. Okay. That's where I wear X-ray glasses. Yeah. Well, that's right. I suppose you could have to deal with players who have X-ray glasses, so they can see past the Dungeon Master screen at the dice behind the Dungeon Master screen. Dear. Okay, what do you got here? If Hubber, this video is more about dealing with metagaming than about knowledge checks. Well, actually, no, it is about knowledge checks. It is actually very much about knowledge checks, because it is one of the things that players tend to want to re-roll. Out of all of the ability checks that you can make, knowledge checks are the ones they often want to re-roll. Or if they are doing something like acrobatics or athletics, they're often the ones that they say, oh no, can I do it again? So I have done a video on monster knowledge checks, which I did ages ago, where I tried to explain that basically, the first thing you do when you come across a monster is you don't roll initiative. First thing you do when it's your turn is you ask, can I make a knowledge check on this monster? So you know a bit more about it before you start throwing spells, shooting arrows, and swinging your sword. Persham, how's it going? Matt, the DM that was doing AL, if it was arcane writing, you had to be proficient in Arcana just to be able to make a check. I like the rule. Well, that's the rule that you will use when you're a Dungeon Master. I don't think it's too much of an issue. I think there are very few things in Dungeons and Dragons that require you to be proficient for you to be able to actually not be able to make a roll. The concept is that the designers wanted everybody to be able to roll a dice and actually hopefully have a chance at being successful. And I don't actually have an issue with that, which is why I presented you with the option where everybody gets to roll, but if you're not proficient, you have to get double the value on the dice to be successful at the same sort of check as somebody who is proficient. I think that's actually a pretty good way of dealing with that issue. I have used it a couple of times. What will happen is that players will get confused and say, but I got a higher value than he did or she did. Why am I getting less information than they are? And you say, look, you are not proficient. So you are making this check untrained. Therefore, it's a harder check. And now they know that there's no real way to get around this. They're still allowed to make the check. They still know what the value is. Okay? All of that still remains. But now they know that even if I roll really good, it won't matter because I have to be proficient in that skill or that knowledge to get a decent result. And therefore, I'm better off to let somebody else do it, which is why you start using the concept of, can I help somebody else? If I know a bit about this area, this particular piece of knowledge, whether it be Arcana, nature, history, whatever, can I help them sort of recall that information and sort of piece things together? Matt, you're welcome. Oh, sorry, no re-rolls allowed. Yep, you can go with that. Look, I don't have a particular fancy for how you go about doing this. I think everything has its place. I would suggest you keep changing your strategies to keep the players off balance a little bit. But yeah, I've provided you with a couple of different ways of doing it, which should be able to solve many of your problems. But I'm not sure what part you missed, Matt, but if you missed it, okay. Persham, make them roll at disadvantage. Well, I suppose you could. I suppose that is an option. Certainly, you could say, look, if you are untrained, you can make the check, but you're rolling at disadvantage. Hadn't really thought about that. It's actually a good point. And you take the lowest result on your dice. You still run into the problem of you've allowed them to roll dice, so they've still got some feeling of control over the process, but they still know they're probably going to do pretty poorly. So I guess it's just another angle, another way of doing what I've already talked about already. with some of the other strategies that I've discussed. Alan Hell, sorry. Morning, Fred. After playing 3.5 for a long time, I'm just about to start playing 5e. Okay, cool. What are the main differences? Okay, the main differences between 3.5 is there's less of a focus on using a grid and a mat. The concept of using theatre of the mind is very high. You will find that the principle for 3.5 and Dungeons & Dragons 5e, so diagonal movement is probably the one that you're going to come across the most. That is, normally when you move diagonally, the first square counts as 5 feet and then the second square as 10 feet. So you're really moving, when you're moving diagonally, you're moving 1.5. That is only a variant rule in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Okay, it's a variant rule. Normally, if you move diagonally, it's 5 feet no matter what. So it doesn't matter whether you go horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. Every square represents just 5 feet. There's none of this 1.5 nonsense. I actually prefer that myself, but if you have an issue with that, you might struggle with that aspect. 3.5 is more codified, very, very specific. Dungeons & Dragons 5e leaves more up to the Dungeon Master to interpret. Therefore, there can be a lot more confusion, but it also can be a lot simpler. There's not a lot of 1s and 2s or -1s and -2s. A lot of little modifiers don't usually apply to Dungeons & Dragons 5e compared to 3.5. So normally your main mechanic is advantage and disadvantage. If you have a bonus, you roll 2 dice and you take the highest result and add that to your modifier. And if you have a penalty applied, you roll disadvantage 2 dice and you take the lowest result, which in this case would be the 4 rather than the 20. So that would be the main differences. They have built in character backgrounds mechanically into Dungeons & Dragons 5e, something that didn't really take place in 3.5. And the feats, a lot of the feats, which is an optional rule, people don't have to use them. You can pluck them in or pluck them out, and some people, you can have the same people playing at the game at the table with Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Some people will use a feat, and some people will just not use feats. So those are probably some of the major differences, Alan. There will be others, but I've just off the top of my head, while I'm doing a live stream, that's what I can remember. Pearsham, 5e is the latest flavour everyone is going with in current year. Yeah, and I would imagine they will be going with Dungeons & Dragons 5e for quite some time, at least another 2 years before we see anything else take place, at least until they drop the movie. When they drop the movie, I suspect they will get a push to try and put out a new Dungeons & Dragons game system, but only if the sales on Dungeons & Dragons 5e is falling. If Dungeons & Dragons 5e, in terms of the player's handbook and the starter boxes, are selling or increasing in their sales, they will probably leave the rule system alone. Yellowmouth, how's it going? How would you treat a lore bard who is semi-proficient in every skill? Okay, I know what you're talking about here because I've been in this situation before, right? You're talking about somebody who has expertise. Does the bard, if they have something like expertise, where they get to add half their proficiency to any kind of skill check, provided they're not already proficient with it, and they're dealing with a knowledge check or any kind of skill, can they make that lore check? That's really up to you. I think, honestly, you have to decide. They obviously know a little bit. They don't know quite as much as somebody who has their full proficiency added to that knowledge check or lore check. But yeah, I don't know that I would. I'm still unsure about how I would approach that because it is yet another hassle to deal with, created by, honestly, too many rules in a game system. Dungeons & Dragons 5e is certainly a lot simpler than some of the other versions, but it's still too complicated and too many things going on. And I am a minimalist. I like simplicity. I want 5-year-olds to play the game so that all of their parents can play with them. That's where my head is at. Okay. Sorry I couldn't really answer that question, Yellowmouth, to your satisfaction. Okay, John, what do you got here? Alan, for one thing, the math is a whole lot easier. Yes, it is. Fred, why do you hate the Pythagorean theorem? Because it's ridiculous. I don't hate Pythagorean. My degree is in psychology and mathematics. But there used to be situations that would arise where somebody who was moving 30 feet, so to give you an example, moving 30 feet, and the diagonal movement thing, because I know there's a lot of people who don't get it. I've been avoiding doing a video on this topic for many reasons because I know the backlash would be immense. But I'll explain and show you what I mean by this. Here is where the issue is for me. This person moves 30 feet. This person, Dritz, also moves 30 feet. So they go 5. So this is our starting point. This is where we start. This is the dice to indicate from where we are. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Okay. 5, 15. Yeah, makes sense. Now, if I start from the same point as the barbarian, it's 5, 15, 20, 30. Now, I want you to look at the distance that the Dritz has moved diagonally, and I want you to look at the distance the bard has moved in a straight line, not going diagonally, going vertical or horizontal. And I will tell you now, if I get out a ruler, and gosh, I wish I had a ruler on me, I will guarantee you that the distance from here to here is longer than here to here. It should be completely obvious here. And gosh, I wish, that's it. I'm going to get a ruler out. I should do it now. Getting a ruler out. Yep, we use a steel ruler because steel rulers are better. Okay, so let's measure the distance from these two characters. They came from the same square. We're going to measure from the back. Now, I'm a tabletop wargamer, so we never used squares. I thought the concept of using squares in Dungeons & Dragons was brilliant because I've been using measuring tapes for years, right? So here we go. So I'm going to go and measure this distance from here to here. And that from where the back of that miniature is to the start of that, the back of that die, where the back of the, front of that dice is. This is exactly 152 millimeters. That's 152 millimeters exactly. Okay. All right. Now let's go over here and measure this one over here. So from the back of the miniature, this is the square that they're in, to the dice. So I'm going to have to move the dice over just slightly so that I'm hitting the same square. Now I'm measuring from the back of that square where the dice is. So we get the same distance. And what is the distance on this? People think I don't know anything about maths, but seriously I do. Okay, so let's see. Okay, that is 1, 2, where is it? 1, 2, 7. That's 127 millimeters. There's my issue with diagonal movement and Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 and using the concept of 1.5 for diagonal movement. Because you are moving slower and it's not realistic. If I really want a game that's totally accurate, I would ditch the squares and go back to using my measuring tape. If you really want to be that accurate, then I would just go with whatever. And I think ditch the concept of worrying about it mathematically, because it isn't correct. I've had this discussion before, and now that I've done it on this video, maybe I will grow the balls that I need to do the video on diagonal movement, because obviously my balls were not big enough until the topic was discussed. Now, I'm not giving you a hard time, Yellowmouth, but that is the reason why I dislike the concept of diagonal movement costing 1.5 squares, because it doesn't work out, and it is not mathematically correct. It is trying to be as close as possible, but if you really need that, then just go use a measuring tape and go back to what I was doing, which was wargaming. Yeah, use a measuring tape. Okay, so we've covered that. All right, back down through here. You can tell I'm rather passionate about this yellowmouth, so I do apologise if I feel like I've given you a hard time. I wasn't. No, not really wrapping your knuckles. It does seem a little bit like that. I do apologise if I seem like I was a bit heavy, but this is one of the reasons why I don't like it. And I've had this discussion with many of my nerdy friends and other people on YouTube in the comments section, and I know I'm right because I came from wargaming. Where we did not use squares, we used a measuring tape. We had to measure exactly from the back end, or should I say the front end. So when we were doing our measuring, it was always from the front end of the miniature to the front side of the miniature in terms of movement, to make sure we were moving exactly the distance we were allowed to and no more. No tricky stuff like that. No. Okay, so moving through the questions. 5e is a breath of fresh air to me. That's why I love it so much. It removed a lot of the complexity that 3.5 had. To be honest, I would have still been playing 3.5 if 4e hadn't come along. And I kind of regret going to 4e, but it got me where I am, and now 5e is a lot better, and hopefully it will just get improve more and more. And I feel like I just want a really stripped down engine with hardly anything there, and if I really want complexity, I'd strap it on there when I need to and let everybody starting the game just deal with the real basics. Yeah, yellow just raised the DC. Yeah, John, I know. Less crunch and less meta gamey. Yeah, I feel like that's... I don't like too much codifying of the game system because it restricts people's imagination in terms of what they can do. It still happens with Dungeons & Dragons 5e, where people will start looking at their character sheet and saying, what abilities do I have, rather than what could I try and see what happens. And I think that is a shame. And certainly I'd like to think that one day we will get back to a point where people just try stuff just because it would be fun to see what would happen, no matter what happens. Pearsham, you don't need to plot out play progress 1 to 20 at creation. Yeah, I wouldn't play from level 1 to 20 if I were you. I've done it. It's not that much fun. Make them roll at disadvantage, then they give them the bonus. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I kind of feel the same. Okay, ditch the metric and go with freedom units. Yeah, okay. What's that, John? What Pierre said, and higher DCs to keep them from just dominating the group and even making the wizard look stupid. Oh, I don't know about that. Okay, so wargaming. Yeah, look, so people, when I start talking about movement and my and so forth, you have to understand I came from a background of wargaming. Dungeons and Dragons is something I didn't play a lot of initially. It was 40k and Fantasy Warhammer. Those were the games that I played more than anything else. I also played a lot of board games before that, but a vast majority was wargaming. Okay, so I think I've covered everything I needed to. Nobody's got any other questions, which means I get to go and have some food and a relax and a chat and chat with myself. No, don't do that. No, if I'm chatting with myself, it's a bad thing. But I will say, hey, thank you for everybody who put up with me and came and showed up. I will do more videos on knowledge checks, but it really needs to be broken down a lot more than I have. So make sure to have a good day, morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are in the world. This is my last live stream for today. And look after your family, your friends, and yourself. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.